The morning mist hung heavy over Buckingham Palace as Dr. Sarah Chen walked through the grand corridors, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. She had been the royal family's personal physician for over 15 years, but today felt different. The weight of the news she carried made each step feel like walking through quicksand. Princess Catherine had always been the picture of health and grace. At 39, she was vibrant, energetic, and completely devoted to her 3 children and royal duties. She never missed a public engagement, always wore a genuine smile, and had become the people's beloved princess. But, for the past 3 months, something had been terribly wrong. It started with small things that most people would ignore. Catherine began feeling unusually tired after her morning runs through Hyde Park. She would sit down after playing with her children and need a moment to catch her breath. The palace staff noticed she was eating less at dinner, often pushing food around her plate while engaging in conversation to hide her lack of appetite. Dr. Chen remembered the first time Catherine mentioned the symptoms during a routine checkup. "I just feel so exhausted lately," Catherine had said, sitting on the examination table in her private medical suite within the palace. "William thinks I'm just stressed about the upcoming royal tour, but this feels different. I wake up tired, even after sleeping for 10 hours. The doctor had initially thought it might be stress-related. Royal life came with immense pressure, and Catherine had always handled it with grace, but perhaps it was finally taking its toll. They ran basic blood tests, checking for anemia, thyroid issues, and vitamin deficiencies. Everything came back normal. But Catherine's condition continued to worsen. She began experiencing dizzy spells during public appearances, though she hid them well from the cameras. Only her closest protection officers noticed how she would briefly lean against a wall or take an extra moment to compose herself. Her skin, once radiant and glowing, began to look pale and drawn. Prince William became increasingly worried as he watched his wife struggle through daily activities that once came naturally to her. During a private moment in their apartment at Kensington Palace, he found Catherine sitting on their bed, staring out the window with tears in her eyes. "What's happening to me, William?" she had whispered, her voice barely audible. "I feel like my body is betraying me, and I don't understand why." William held her close, feeling helpless. He had seen his mother struggle with public scrutiny and personal battles, and now he was watching the woman he loved face something equally challenging, but entirely different. This wasn't about media pressure or royal protocol, this was about Catherine's health, and that terrified him more than anything else. Dr. Chan ordered more comprehensive tests. Blood work that dove deeper into Catherine's cellular structure, imaging scans of her organs, and consultations with specialists from London's most prestigious hospitals. The palace medical team worked with absolute discretion, understanding that any leak of information could create a media frenzy. 3 weeks passed before the results came in. Dr. Chen sat in her office at the palace, reviewing the reports from multiple specialists. Her hands trembled slightly as she read through the findings. After practicing medicine for 25 years, she had delivered difficult news to many patients, but this was different. This was Catherine, a woman she had grown to deeply respect and care for, and the diagnosis was devastating. The blood tests revealed abnormal protein levels, specifically in Catherine's bone marrow. The imaging showed signs that made Dr. Chen's heart sink. Multiple specialists had reviewed the case independently, and they all reached the same conclusion. Catherine was showing early signs of a rare blood disorder that could progress into something much more serious. As Dr. Chen prepared to deliver the news, she thought about the 3 children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, who would soon need to understand why their mother might not be able to play with them as much as before. She thought about Prince William, who would now face the possibility of losing another important woman in his life. And she thought about the millions of people around the world who looked up to Catherine as a symbol of strength and grace. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning. Dr. Chen would meet with Catherine and William in the private sitting room of their Kensington Palace apartment. The location was chosen carefully, somewhere comfortable and private, away from the formal atmosphere of official palace rooms. That evening, Catherine had dinner with her family as usual. She helped Louis with his homework, listened to Charlotte talk about her day at school, and discussed weekend plans with George. To anyone watching, it seemed like a normal royal family dinner.
But Catherine felt an underlying sense of dread that she couldn't shake.
After the children were asleep, she and William sat together in their living room. The same room where they had celebrated birthdays, discussed royal engagements, and shared countless quiet moments together as a couple. "The doctor wants to see us both tomorrow," Catherine said softly, her hand finding William's.
"I have a feeling it's not going to be good news."
William squeezed her hand gently.
"Whatever it is, we'll face it together. You're the strongest person I know, Catherine.
And you're not alone in this."
Neither of them slept well that night.
Catherine lay awake thinking about her children and the possibility that her time with them might be more limited than she had ever imagined. William stared at the ceiling, remembering the phone call that changed his life when he was 15, the call that told him his mother had been in a car accident. The fear of loss was something he knew too well. The next morning arrived with typical London grey clouds and light rain. Dr. Chin arrived at Kensington Palace at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying her medical files and the weight of knowledge that would change everything for the royal family. Catherine had chosen to wear a simple blue dress, the same shade as the engagement ring William had given her, which had once belonged to his mother. It was a small comfort, having something that connected her to Diana's strength and memory. As they sat down in the sitting room, Dr. Chen looked at the couple before her. Catherine sat straight, her hands folded in her lap, every inch the composed princess she had trained herself to be. William sat close beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder.
"Your Highness, Dr.
Chen began, her voice steady but kind. "I want to start by saying that what I'm about to tell you is serious, but it's not hopeless. Medicine has advanced tremendously, and we have treatment options." Catherine felt her heart begin to race, but she maintained her calm exterior.
"Please, just tell us what's wrong." Dr. Chen opened her file and took a deep breath.
"The tests show that you have a condition affecting your blood cells.
It's called myelodysplastic syndrome, and it means that your bone marrow isn't producing healthy blood cells the way it should.
This explains the fatigue, the weakness, and all the symptoms you've been experiencing."
The words hung in the air like a heavy fog.
William felt the world shift beneath him, while Catherine processed the information with the analytical mind that had helped her navigate royal life for over a decade.
"What does this mean for my future?"
Catherine asked, her voice remarkably steady.
"What does it mean for my children?"
Dr. Chan leaned forward slightly. "With proper treatment, many people with this condition live full, productive lives. We've caught it early, which gives us more options. But, I won't lie to you, it will require ongoing medical care, and there may be times when you'll need to reduce your public commitments."
The implications began to sink in.
Catherine thought about the royal tour scheduled for the following month, the charity events she had planned, the school visits that brought her such joy. More importantly, she thought about her role as a mother and wife. "How long have I had this?" she asked. "It's likely been developing slowly for months, possibly even longer. These conditions don't appear overnight, which is why the symptoms started gradually and have been getting progressively worse."
William finally found his voice. "What are our next steps? What do we need to do?"
"We need to start treatment soon," Dr. Chen explained. "This will involve regular monitoring, medication, and possibly more intensive treatments depending on how the condition progresses. I've already been in contact with some of the best hematologists in the world, and they're all willing to consult on Catherine's case." As the meeting continued, Catherine felt a strange sense of relief mixed with fear. Finally, there was an explanation for how she had been feeling. The uncertainty that had been plaguing her for months now had a name and a treatment plan. But the fear of what lay ahead was overwhelming. After Dr. Chen left, Catherine and William sat in silence for several minutes. The morning light was streaming through the windows of their sitting room, illuminating family photos and children's artwork on the nearby tables. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed.
"We need to tell the children," Catherine said finally.
"But I don't know how to explain this to them without scaring them."
William moved closer to her on the sofa. "We'll figure it out together. And we'll be honest with them in an age-appropriate way.
They deserve to understand what's happening with their mother."
"What about the public? What about my engagements?"
Catherine's mind was racing through all the implications of her diagnosis.
"The public can wait," William said firmly. "Your health and our family come first. We'll handle everything else as it comes."
As they held each other in their sitting room, both Catherine and William understood that their lives had just taken a dramatic turn. The future they had planned, the certainty they had felt about their roles and responsibilities, had all been shaken by a medical diagnosis that would change everything. Outside the palace walls, the world continued as normal. Tourists took photos at the gates, the British press focused on political scandals and celebrity gossip, and millions of people went about their daily lives without knowing that inside Kensington Palace, a beloved princess had just received news that would soon send shockwaves throughout the United Kingdom and beyond. The palace staff continued their duties, unaware that in a few days, their carefully ordered world would be turned upside down. The royal protection officers maintained their vigilant watch, not yet knowing that they would soon need to accommodate new security measures for medical appointments and treatment schedules. Dr. Chen returned to her office at the palace and began making phone calls to specialists around the world. She knew that Catherine's case would require the absolute best medical care available, and she was determined to assemble a team that would give the princess the best possible chance for a full recovery. Meanwhile, in their private apartment, Catherine and William began the difficult process of adjusting to their new reality. They talked about treatment options, about how to maintain as much normalcy as possible for their children, and about the inevitability of making the diagnosis public. "The hardest part," Catherine said as they walked through their private garden later that afternoon, "is not knowing how this will affect George, Charlotte, and Louis. They're so young, and they need stability." "They need their mother," William replied. "Whatever treatment you need, whatever changes we have to make, the most important thing is that you get better. Everything else is secondary." As the sun set over London that evening, Catherine stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the city she had come to love as her home. Tomorrow, she would begin making the phone calls that would set her treatment in motion. Soon, she would have to tell her parents, her siblings, and eventually the world about her condition. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of grief for the life she had thought she would continue living. The spontaneous family outings, the long royal tours, the endless energy she had always brought to her public duties, all of that might need to change. However, as she felt William's arms wrap around her from behind and heard the distant sounds of her children playing in their rooms, Catherine also felt something else: determination. She had faced the challenges of marrying into the royal family, had navigated public scrutiny and personal growth, and had become a mother to 3 beautiful children. This medical diagnosis was just another challenge to overcome. The palace that had become her home now felt different, not just as a place of duty and protocol, but as a fortress where she would gather her strength for the fight ahead. The staff who had become like family would soon rally around her with even more dedication. The British people, who had embraced her as their princess, would soon have the chance to show their love and support in ways that Catherine couldn't yet imagine. As night fell completely over London, Catherine made a silent promise to herself, to William, and to their children. She would face this illness with the same grace and strength she had brought to every other aspect of her royal life. She would fight not just for herself, but for every person who looked up to her as an example of resilience and hope. The diagnosis was frightening, but Catherine was not powerless. She had the best medical care in the world, a loving family, and the support of an entire nation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new possibilities for healing and hope. In the quiet of their bedroom, as William slept beside her and London settled into the peaceful hours before dawn, Catherine closed her eyes and prepared herself for whatever lay ahead. The woman who had once been known simply as Kate Middleton had become Princess Catherine through determination and grace. Now, she would become something even more powerful: a survivor. 2 weeks had passed since Dr. Chen delivered the devastating diagnosis, and Catherine found herself living in 2 different worlds. During the day, she maintained her royal duties with the same grace and composure that had made her beloved by the British public. But, behind closed doors, she was navigating the complex maze of medical appointments, treatment consultations, and the emotional weight of her condition. The morning routine at Kensington Palace had subtly changed. Catherine now started her day 30 minutes earlier, not for additional royal preparations, but for the series of medications Dr. Chen had prescribed. The small pills sat in a discreet wooden box on her dressing table, hidden behind her jewelry collection. Each morning, she would take them with a glass of water, followed by a moment of quiet reflection before facing the day ahead. William had become her silent guardian, watching for signs of fatigue or discomfort that others might miss. During their public appearances together, he would position himself strategically so that Catherine could lean on him if needed, while making it appear like nothing more than typical royal protocol. Their communication had evolved to include subtle signals. A gentle touch on the arm meant she needed to sit down soon, a particular look meant she was feeling overwhelmed. The children sensed something was different, though Catherine and William had not yet found the right moment to explain her condition. Prince George, now 11 and perceptive beyond his years, had begun asking more questions about why his mother seemed tired more often. Princess Charlotte, with her natural empathy, had started bringing Catherine small drawings and flowers from the palace gardens without being asked. Little Prince Louis, at 6 years old, seemed to sense the shift in family dynamics and had become more clingy, especially at bedtime. During a particularly difficult evening, Catherine sat in Louis's bedroom reading him his favorite story about brave knights and kind princesses. As she read, her voice grew softer and more strained than usual. Louis looked up at her with his bright blue eyes and said, "Mummy, are you sick? You sound different when you read now." Catherine's heart ached as she looked down at her youngest child. The innocence in his question reminded her of how much her condition was already affecting their family, even though they had tried to shield the children from the worst of it. "Mummy is a little tired lately, darling," she said, smoothing his hair. "But the doctors are helping me feel better. You don't need to worry about anything except being the wonderful little boy you are." Louis seemed satisfied with this answer, but Catherine knew that more difficult conversations were coming. Dr. Chen had recommended that they tell the children about her condition sooner rather than later, especially since her treatment would soon become more intensive. The next morning brought an unexpected challenge. Catherine was scheduled to visit a children's hospital in Manchester, one of her favorite types of royal engagements. She had always drawn energy from spending time with young patients, their families, and the dedicated medical staff who cared for them. But, as she prepared for the visit, Catherine felt more nervous than she had about any public appearance in years. How could she walk through hospital wards, meeting children who were fighting their own battles with illness, while hiding her own medical condition? The irony was not lost on her, and she struggled with feelings of guilt and uncertainty. Dr. Chen had cleared her for the engagement, with strict instructions to limit the visit to 2 hours and to take frequent breaks. A medical aide would accompany her, disguised as a regular member of her staff, carrying emergency medication and monitoring her condition throughout the day. The flight to Manchester was Catherine's first test of managing her condition during official travel. The fatigue that had once been a minor inconvenience was now a constant companion. She found herself needing to concentrate harder on conversations, to focus more intently on appearing energetic and engaged. William, who was not scheduled to join this particular engagement, had wanted to cancel it entirely. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he had said as they discussed the trip over breakfast. "The public would understand if you needed to reduce your schedule." "But they don't know why I would need to reduce my schedule," Catherine replied. "And, until we're ready to tell them, I need to maintain as much normalcy as possible. These hospital visits are too important to cancel without explanation." The hospital visit began as it always did, with Catherine being greeted by enthusiastic staff and administrators. She moved through the pediatric ward with her characteristic warmth, stopping to chat with young patients and their families. But something was different this time. Where she once drew energy from these interactions, Catherine now found herself giving more of herself than she had to spare. In the oncology ward, she met 8-year-old Emma, a little girl with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Emma was in the middle of her treatment protocol, her head covered with a bright pink scarf that matched her cheerful personality. As Catherine sat beside Emma's bed, listening to her talk about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, Catherine felt an overwhelming connection to this brave little girl. "Being sick is scary sometimes," Emma confided, her small hand reaching for Catherine's. "But the doctors here are really good, and my mom says that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what you need to do even when you are scared." Catherine squeezed Emma's hand gently, fighting back tears. This 8-year-old child was unknowingly giving her exactly the wisdom she needed to hear.
Emma, that is one of the wisest things anyone has ever told me. Thank you for sharing that.
As Catherine moved through the rest of the hospital visit, Emma's words echoed in her mind.
Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what you need to do even when you are scared.
Catherine realized that she had been so focused on appearing strong and unaffected by her diagnosis that she had forgotten the importance of acknowledging her own fears and vulnerabilities. The return flight to London gave Catherine time to reflect on the day and the decision that she and William would need to make soon.
How long could they keep her condition private? How long could she continue her full royal schedule without her health suffering? And, most importantly, what was the right way to tell their children and, eventually, the public about her diagnosis?
That evening, Catherine and William had dinner alone after putting the children to bed. The dining room at Kensington Palace felt particularly intimate with just the two of them, a stark contrast to the formal state dinners they often attended.
How did today feel? William asked, studying Catherine's face for signs of the exhaustion he had learned to recognize.
Physically, it was challenging, Catherine admitted.
But, emotionally, it was exactly what I needed. There was a little girl named Emma who reminded me that courage isn't about pretending everything is fine.
It's about facing difficult things honestly. William reached across the table and took her hand.
I'd been thinking about that too.
Maybe it's time we start facing this more honestly, beginning with our own children.
I know you're right, Catherine said.
George is already asking more questions, and I can see that Charlotte is worried about something even though she doesn't know what.
They deserve to understand what's happening in our family.
They spent the rest of dinner discussing how to approach the conversation with their children.
Dr.
Chen had provided them with resources about explaining medical conditions to young people, and Catherine had been reading everything she could find about helping children understand serious illness in a parent. The next few days were spent preparing for what would be one of the most difficult family conversations they had ever had. Catherine and William decided to tell each child individually, adjusting their explanation based on age and maturity level. They would start with George, as the eldest, then Charlotte, and, finally, Louis.
George's conversation took place in William's study on a quiet Saturday afternoon.
Catherine and William sat with their eldest son in the comfortable leather chairs that had been in the palace for generations. George sensed the serious nature of the meeting immediately. "Is someone in trouble?" he asked, looking between his parents with the mature concern that sometimes made him seem older than his 11 years. "No one is in trouble, George," Catherine said gently. "But, Daddy, I need to talk to you about something important that's happening in our family." William took the lead, explaining in simple terms that Catherine had been feeling unwell and that doctors had discovered she had a condition that affected her blood. He emphasized that she was receiving excellent medical care and that while it was serious, it was treatable. George listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about treatment, whether Catherine would need to go to the hospital, and how this might affect their family life. His maturity in processing the information made Catherine both proud and heartbroken. No 11-year-old should have to worry about their parents' health.
"Will you get better, Mummy?"
George asked, the question that Catherine had been dreading and preparing for. "The doctors are working very hard to help me get better," Catherine replied honestly. "I'm going to do everything I can to take care of myself and follow the treatment plan. But it might mean that sometimes I need to rest more, or that our plans might need to change."
George nodded solemnly. "Can I help somehow?"
"I could help with Louis and Charlotte if you need to rest." Catherine felt her heart swell with pride at her son's immediate desire to help. "You can help by continuing to be the wonderful big brother you already are. And by talking to us if you have questions or if you're feeling worried about anything." The conversation with Charlotte, held the next day in the family's private sitting room, was different but equally moving. 9-year-old Charlotte had inherited her mother's emotional intelligence and immediately understood the seriousness of what her parents were telling her.
"Is this why you've been looking sad sometimes?"
Charlotte asked, curling up next to Catherine on the sofa.
"I noticed, but I didn't want to ask."
"Yes, darling," Catherine said, wrapping her arm around her daughter. "I have been feeling worried about being sick,
and sometimes that makes me look sad even when I don't mean to." Charlotte was quiet for several minutes, processing the information. Then, she looked up at Catherine with determination in her eyes. "I'm going to draw you pictures to make you feel better. And I'm going to help you remember to take your medicine." The offer was so innocent and heartfelt that Catherine had to excuse herself for a moment to compose herself in the hallway. When she returned, Charlotte was already planning how she could help her mother feel better. Louis's conversation was the simplest but, perhaps, the most challenging. At 6 years old, he didn't need to understand the medical complexities, but he did need to know that his family was still secure and that his parents would take care of him. "Mummy has something called a sickness that makes her feel very tired," William explained as Louis sat on his lap in the nursery. "The doctors are giving her medicine to help her feel better, but sometimes she might need extra hugs and extra help." Louis's main concern was whether Catherine would still be able to read him bedtime stories. When Catherine assured him that she would continue their nightly routine as much as possible, he seemed satisfied. His 6-year-old mind focused on the immediate and tangible aspects of their relationship rather than the larger implications of her illness. In the days following these conversations, Catherine watched her children process the information in their own ways. George became more helpful around the house, often finishing his homework quickly so he could spend time with his mother. Charlotte started leaving small notes in Catherine's handbag and jacket pockets with messages like "I love you" and "You're brave." Louis became more affectionate, giving extra hugs and kisses before school each day. The family's new dynamic was tender and protective, but Catherine worried about the additional emotional burden her children were carrying. She made appointments for each of them to speak with the child psychologist who worked with royal families, ensuring they had professional support as they adjusted to this new reality. Meanwhile, the pressure of maintaining public appearances while managing her condition was becoming more challenging. Catherine had always prided herself on her preparation and attention to detail during royal engagements. Now, she found herself needing to carefully manage her energy levels throughout each day. Her private secretary, working closely with Dr. Chen, began subtly adjusting Catherine's schedule. Engagements were shortened by 15 or 20 minutes. Travel between events included longer buffer times for rest. Public appearances were scheduled with more gaps between them, allowing for recovery time. These changes were implemented so carefully that the media and public didn't notice any significant difference in Catherine's presence or performance. But the palace staff, who worked closely with her every day, began to sense that something had shifted, even though they didn't know what. During one particularly difficult week, Catherine had to make the decision to cancel a private engagement with a charity close to her heart. The organization was hosting an event to raise money for children's mental health services, and Catherine had been scheduled to give a keynote speech. But, on the morning of the event, she woke up feeling dizzy and nauseous, side effects that Dr. Chen had warned might occur as her body adjusted to the medications. Canceling the engagement meant disappointing not only the charity organizers but also the many people who had planned to attend specifically because of Catherine's involvement. It was the first time since her diagnosis that her condition had directly impacted her public duties in a way that couldn't be hidden or worked around. "I feel like I'm letting everyone down," Catherine confided to William as they sat in their bedroom that morning. "These organizations depend on royal patronage for visibility and fundraising. How can I maintain my commitments when I don't know how I'll feel from day to day?" William helped her see the situation from a different perspective. "You're not letting anyone down. You're dealing with a serious medical condition while trying to maintain your responsibilities. No one expects you to be superhuman." But Catherine did expect herself to be superhuman. For over a decade, she had built her royal identity around reliability, dedication, and never disappointing the people who counted on her. Learning to accept the limitations imposed by her illness was proving to be one of the most difficult aspects of her diagnosis. As the weeks continued, Catherine and William realized that keeping her condition private indefinitely was becoming unsustainable. The carefully managed schedule changes and the family's new dynamics were creating stress that wasn't helping Catherine's recovery. More importantly, they recognized that eventually, the truth would need to be shared with the British public who had embraced Catherine as their princess. "We need to start thinking about how and when to make this public," Catherine said one evening as they walked through their private garden.
The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were beginning to change colors, reminding them both of the passage of time and the inevitability of change.
I know, William agreed.
But I want to make sure we're ready for everything that will come with that announcement. The media attention will be intense, and we need to be prepared to protect our children and your recovery process. They began having preliminary discussions with the palace communications team about the possibility of releasing a statement about Catherine's health. These conversations were kept strictly confidential, involving only the most senior and trusted members of the royal staff. The weight of the secret was becoming heavier not just for Catherine and William, but for everyone who knew about her condition. Dr. Chen found herself being more careful about her movements around the palace, aware that any unusual activity might be noticed by the press. The children's protection officers were briefed on additional security measures related to potential future medical appointments, though they weren't given details about Catherine's specific condition. As October approached, bringing with it the traditional autumn schedule of royal engagements, Catherine knew that significant decisions would need to be made soon. She couldn't continue indefinitely managing a full royal schedule while dealing with her medical treatment and the side effects of her medications. But she also wasn't ready to give up the work that brought meaning to her life. The hospital visits, the charity engagements, the public appearances that allowed her to connect with people across the United Kingdom, these weren't just royal duties for Catherine, they were sources of purpose and joy. Finding the balance between her health needs and her royal responsibilities would require difficult choices and honest conversations about the future. Catherine knew that the coming weeks would bring decisions that would affect not only her own life but the lives of her children, her husband, and the millions of people who looked to her as their princess. The woman who had once worried about curtsying correctly at her first royal engagement was now facing challenges that no amount of royal protocol training could have prepared her for. But she was facing them with the same grace and determination that had made her beloved by the British people, even though they didn't yet know about the battle she was fighting behind the palace walls. The first week of November brought an unexpected crisis that would force Catherine and William's hand far sooner than they had planned. Catherine was scheduled to attend the Royal Variety Performance, one of the most high-profile events in the royal calendar. The evening would be broadcast live on television, with millions of viewers watching from around the world. It was the type of engagement that Catherine typically loved: glamorous, entertaining, and supporting British arts and entertainment. But, as she prepared for the evening in her dressing room at Kensington Palace, Catherine felt worse than she had since receiving her diagnosis. The new medication regimen Dr. Chen had started her on was causing more severe side effects than expected. Nausea, dizziness, and extreme fatigue had become daily challenges, but tonight they were overwhelming. Her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, had been with Catherine for 8 years and knew her better than almost anyone outside the immediate family. As she helped Catherine into her elegant emerald gown, Sarah noticed that her hands were shaking and her complexion was unusually pale. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah said gently, "perhaps we should consider whether you're feeling well enough for this evening's engagement." Catherine looked at herself in the mirror. The dress was beautiful, her hair and makeup were perfect, but she could see what Sarah saw: she looked fragile and unwell. For a moment, she considered calling off the engagement, but the thought of disappointing the performers and the millions of viewers who looked forward to this annual event made her determined to continue. "I'll be fine once we get there," Catherine said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "The adrenaline of the event will help." William appeared in the doorway, handsome in his formal evening wear but clearly concerned about his wife. He had been watching her struggle through the preparation for this evening, and his protective instincts were telling him they should stay home. "Catherine, you don't look well," he said directly. "We can make excuses. No one will question it." "I can't cancel the Royal Variety Performance," Catherine replied, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "It's too important, and too many people are counting on us being there." They compromised on additional precautions. Dr. Chen would be present at the venue, positioned discreetly in a private box where she could monitor Catherine throughout the evening. Medical staff would be on standby, and they would plan to leave immediately after the royal presentations, skipping the traditional meet and greet with performers. The journey to the Royal Albert Hall was challenging. Catherine had to close her eyes and focus on breathing steadily to manage the nausea that seemed to worsen with movement. William held her hand the entire time, occasionally asking if she wanted to turn around and go home. "I just need to get through the next 3 hours," Catherine said, more to herself than to William. 3 hours, and then I can rest." Their arrival at the venue was met with the usual fanfare, crowds of people hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal couple, photographers capturing every angle, and reporters providing live commentary for television audiences. Catherine drew on every ounce of royal training she possessed to smile, wave, and appear enthusiastic as they made their way into the historic venue. The first hour of the performance went reasonably well. Catherine was able to sit in the royal box, enjoying the music and comedy while conserving her energy. She applauded at appropriate moments, smiled for the cameras when she knew they were focused on her, and even laughed genuinely at some of the comedic performances. But during the intermission, as she and William were greeting sponsors and VIPs in the royal reception area, Catherine began to feel increasingly unwell. The combination of bright lights, warm temperatures, and the energy required to engage in small talk was taking a toll she hadn't anticipated. "Your Royal Highness, it's such an honor to meet you," said the evening's main sponsor, an enthusiastic businessman who had donated significantly to the charity benefiting from the event. "My wife is such an admirer of your work with children's charities." Catherine smiled and responded appropriately, but William could see the strain in her eyes. Her responses were becoming shorter, and she was gripping his arm more tightly than usual. He began trying to politely shorten their interactions with guests, but the formal protocol of such events made it difficult to rush. "Are you managing?" William whispered to her during a brief moment when they were alone. "I think so," Catherine replied, though she was beginning to feel dizzy. "Just help me get through the rest of the evening." The second half of the performance began with a spectacular musical number featuring a full orchestra and choir. As the music swelled and filled the Royal Albert Hall, Catherine tried to focus on the beauty of the performance to distract herself from how poorly she was feeling. But, halfway through a particularly energetic dance number, Catherine suddenly felt the room beginning to spin. The lights seemed too bright, the music too loud, and she could feel sweat forming on her forehead despite the cool temperature of the venue. "William," she whispered urgently, gripping his hand. "I think I need to leave." William immediately signaled to their protection officer, who was trained to notice such signals and respond quickly. But, before they could discreetly exit the royal box, Catherine's condition worsened dramatically. She tried to stand, intending to make a quiet exit, but, as she rose from her seat, her legs gave out beneath her. William caught her as she collapsed, preventing her from falling completely, but the motion was visible to other people in nearby boxes. "Get Dr. Chen immediately," William said quietly to their protection officer, while supporting Catherine back into her seat. "And we need to leave now." Catherine was conscious but clearly unwell. Her face had lost all color, and she was having difficulty focusing on William's voice. The nausea she had been fighting all evening finally overwhelmed her, and she was sick into the small bag that Sarah quickly provided from the emergency supplies they always carried. Dr. Chen appeared in the royal box within minutes, having witnessed the incident from her vantage point. She quickly assessed Catherine's condition and determined that immediate medical attention was necessary. "We need to get her to the hospital," Dr. Chen said quietly to William. "This level of reaction to the medication isn't normal." The challenge was removing Catherine from the venue without creating a public spectacle. The royal protection team worked quickly to clear a private exit route while William and Dr. Chen helped Catherine to the car. The official explanation given to event organizers was that Catherine had suddenly developed a migraine and needed to leave for a quiet environment. But several audience members had witnessed the incident in the royal box. In the age of social media and constant connectivity, photos and speculation began appearing online within minutes. Blurry images of Catherine being helped from her seat, posts about the royal couple leaving early, and questions about why Catherine had appeared unwell began circulating on social media platforms. The drive to the hospital was frightening for William, who had never seen Catherine so physically compromised. She was conscious but weak, leaning against him in the back seat while Dr. Chen monitored her vital signs and called ahead to the medical team at the private hospital where Catherine would be treated. "I'm so sorry," Catherine kept repeating. "I've ruined everything." "You haven't ruined anything," William assured her.
The only thing that matters right now is getting you the medical care you need.
At the hospital, Catherine was immediately taken to a private room where Dr. Chen and a team of specialists could evaluate her condition. The reaction she had experienced was more severe than expected, indicating that her current medication regimen needed to be adjusted. William sat in the hospital room, watching medical professionals work to stabilize his wife, and realized that their carefully maintained privacy about Catherine's condition had just been shattered. By tomorrow morning, the British press would be demanding answers about why the Princess of Wales had been rushed to the hospital. "We can't hide this anymore," he said to Catherine's private secretary, who had arrived at the hospital to help manage the crisis.
"Too many people saw what happened tonight."
Catherine spent the night in the hospital under observation while doctors adjusted her medication and monitored her response to treatment. By morning, she was feeling much better physically, but both she and William knew that their lives were about to change dramatically. The palace communications team had worked through the night to prepare a statement, knowing that by dawn, every major news outlet in the world would be reporting on Catherine's hospitalization. The challenge was providing enough information to satisfy public concern while maintaining appropriate privacy about her medical condition. Dr. Chen met with Catherine and William early that morning to discuss the medical implications of going public with her diagnosis. "There are advantages to being open about your condition," she explained. "The stress of hiding it hasn't been helpful for your recovery. And there are excellent support systems available for people with myelodysplastic syndrome and their families." Catherine looked out the hospital window at the gathering crowd of reporters and photographers. Word of her hospitalization had spread quickly, and the media attention was intense even without knowing the specific nature of her illness.
"I think I'm ready," Catherine said quietly. "I can't keep pretending that everything is normal when it isn't.
And maybe being honest about what I'm going through will help other people who are facing similar challenges." William admired his wife's courage but worried about the impact that public knowledge of her condition would have on their children and their family's privacy.
"Are you sure you're ready for everything that will come with making this public?"
"Once we announce your diagnosis, there will be no going back to privacy about your medical care." Catherine had spent the sleepless hours of the night thinking about exactly that question. She thought about Emma, the 8-year-old cancer patient who had taught her that bravery means doing what you need to do even when you're scared. She thought about her own children, who were already adjusting to their mother's illness and deserved to see her face it with honesty rather than secrecy. "I'm scared," Catherine admitted. "But I'm more scared of continuing to live with this secret. Last night proved that I can't maintain my royal duties and hide this condition. Something has to change." The decision was made to release a statement that afternoon. The palace communications team, working with Dr. Chen and Catherine's medical advisors, crafted a message that would inform the public about her diagnosis while maintaining appropriate boundaries around her privacy and treatment details. Catherine spent the morning making phone calls to family members who needed to hear the news directly from her before it became public. Her parents, siblings, and other close relatives were told about both her diagnosis and the decision to make it public. Each conversation was emotional, but Catherine felt relief at finally being able to speak openly about what she had been experiencing. The children were brought to the hospital for a family meeting before the announcement was made. George, Charlotte, and Louis needed to understand that soon everyone would know about their mother's illness, and they needed to be prepared for the changes this would bring to their lives. "After today, people are going to know that Mummy is sick," William explained to them as they sat together in Catherine's hospital room. "There might be more attention from photographers and reporters, and people might ask you questions about how Mummy is feeling." George, always mature for his age, asked thoughtful questions about how to handle such situations. Charlotte wanted to know if people would be nice to their mother once they knew she was sick. Louis was mainly concerned about whether Catherine would be coming home soon. The family spent several hours together in the hospital room, talking, playing quiet games, and preparing for the dramatic change that would come with the afternoon's announcement. Catherine felt both nervous and relieved as the moment approached when her private battle would become a public one. At precisely 3 o'clock that afternoon, Buckingham Palace released the statement that would send shockwaves across the United Kingdom and around the world. The carefully worded announcement revealed Catherine's diagnosis of myelodysplastic syndrome, explained that she was receiving excellent medical care, and requested privacy for the family during this challenging time. Within minutes of the statement's release, the news was being broadcast on every major television network and shared across social media platforms worldwide. The hashtag Princess Catherine began trending on social media as millions of people expressed their support and concern for the beloved royal. In her hospital room, Catherine watched the news coverage with a mixture of anxiety and relief. After months of hiding her condition and carefully managing her public appearances, the truth was finally out. There would be no more pretending, no more exhausting efforts to appear healthy when she felt terrible, and no more fear that someone would discover her secret.
How do you feel? William asked as they watched the global response to the announcement unfold on television.
Scared, Catherine said honestly.
But also free. For the first time in months, I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not.
The response from the British public and people around the world was overwhelming in its warmth and support.
Flowers began arriving at all the royal residences within hours of the announcement.
Social media was filled with messages of love, encouragement, and shared experiences from other people who had faced similar medical challenges. As evening approached and Catherine prepared to return home to Kensington Palace, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 24 hours. The carefully guarded secret that had defined her existence for months was now known to millions of people. The private battle she had been fighting was now a public journey that would be watched and supported by people around the world. But, along with the loss of privacy came an unexpected gift, the freedom to be authentic about her experience and the opportunity to use her platform to help others facing similar challenges. Catherine realized that her illness, as frightening and difficult as it was, might also become a source of meaning and purpose in ways she had never imagined. The princess who had collapsed at the Royal Albert Hall was returning home as a different person, not weaker, but perhaps stronger in her vulnerability, and no longer alone in carrying the weight of her diagnosis.
The morning after the public announcement brought a transformed world to Kensington Palace.
Catherine woke up to discover that overnight, she had become something she never expected to be, not just a princess facing a private health battle, but a symbol of hope for millions of people around the world dealing with serious illness. The palace mailroom reported an unprecedented volume of letters, flowers, and packages arriving from across the globe. Messages of support came from heads of state, medical professionals, fellow patients, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by similar diagnoses. The outpouring of love was so overwhelming that additional staff had to be brought in just to manage the response. Dr. Chen arrived at the palace early that morning with updates on Catherine's treatment plan and news about the global medical community's response to her diagnosis. "Princess, I've received calls from hematologists around the world offering their expertise and latest research. Your openness about your condition is already contributing to awareness and, potentially, to medical advancement." Catherine sat in her private sitting room, still in her nightgown and robe, reading through some of the thousands of messages that had arrived. Many were from other patients with myelodysplastic syndrome and related blood disorders, sharing their own experiences and offering encouragement. Others came from medical researchers explaining new treatments being developed, and from families who had faced similar challenges. One letter particularly moved her. It was from a 16-year-old girl named Sophie who had been diagnosed with a blood disorder 6 months earlier and had been struggling with depression and fear about her future. "Your Royal Highness," the letter read, "seeing someone as important and beautiful as you dealing with something similar makes me feel less alone and less ashamed. If a princess can be sick and still be brave, maybe I can too." "This is what I didn't expect," Catherine said to William as he joined her for breakfast in their private dining room. "I thought that announcing my diagnosis would be about managing public attention and getting the medical care I need. I didn't realize it would mean becoming a voice for other people facing these challenges." William had spent much of the night reading through statements from medical charities, patient advocacy groups, and research organizations, all expressing gratitude for Catherine's openness and requesting her involvement in raising awareness about blood disorders. "It seems like your illness might become a platform for helping others in ways we never imagined." The children's reactions to seeing their mother's story on television and in newspapers were mixed but ultimately positive. George felt proud that his mother was being praised for her bravery, though he worried about the increased attention their family would receive. Charlotte was excited to learn that her mother's story was helping other sick children feel better.
Louis was mainly pleased that they didn't have to keep secrets anymore about why his mother was sometimes tired.
Dr. Chen had worked through the night to adjust Catherine's treatment plan based on her reaction at the Royal Albert Hall. The new regimen would be less aggressive but more sustainable, allowing her to maintain some of her royal duties while prioritizing her health and recovery. The goal now, Dr. Chen explained during their morning consultation, is to find a treatment approach that manages your condition effectively while allowing you to live as full a life as possible.
The stress of hiding your illness wasn't helping your recovery. Now that everything is open, we can focus entirely on what's best for your health. Catherine's first public appearance after the announcement was carefully planned for the following week.
She would visit the hematology unit at Great Ormond Street Hospital, meeting with young patients and their families, as well as the medical staff who specialized in treating blood disorders in children.
The visit was both personally meaningful and strategically important.
It would show the public that Catherine was managing her condition and continuing her royal duties, while also demonstrating her commitment to using her platform to support others facing similar challenges. Preparing for the hospital visit required new considerations that Catherine had never faced before. Her private secretary worked with Dr. Chen to ensure that the schedule would accommodate Catherine's energy levels and medication timing. The palace communications team prepared briefing materials about myelodysplastic syndrome to help reporters and the public better understand Catherine's condition. Most importantly, Catherine herself prepared emotionally for being a public face of illness rather than just a royal patron visiting patients. She would now be meeting families as someone who truly understood their fear, uncertainty, and hope from personal experience. The night before the hospital visit, Catherine had dinner with her family and then spent time in her study, reading medical literature about her condition and researching the latest treatment advances. She wanted to be knowledgeable and helpful when speaking with patients and families, not just sympathetic. William found her there late that evening, surrounded by medical journals and patient advocacy materials.
"How are you feeling about tomorrow?" he asked.
"Nervous, but in a good way," Catherine replied. "For months, I've been focused on hiding my illness and maintaining the appearance that everything was normal.
Now I get to do something that might actually help other people who are going through what I'm going through."
The morning of the hospital visit brought crisp December weather and unprecedented media attention. News crews from around the world had gathered outside Great Ormond Street Hospital to document Catherine's first public engagement since revealing her diagnosis. Catherine had chosen her outfit carefully, a warm blue dress that photographed well but was also comfortable for a long day of medical settings and emotional conversations. She wore minimal jewelry and natural makeup, wanting to appear approachable and authentic rather than formally royal. The drive to the hospital gave Catherine time to center herself and prepare for what she knew would be an emotionally challenging but important day. Dr. Chen accompanied her, both to monitor her condition and to provide medical expertise during conversations with patients and families. Their first stop was the teenage unit, where Catherine met with young people between the ages of 13 and 18 who were dealing with various blood disorders. These patients were old enough to understand the serious nature of their conditions and to engage in meaningful conversations about treatment, prognosis, and coping with illness. 17-year-old Marcus had been dealing with aplastic anemia for 2 years and was preparing for a bone marrow transplant. When Catherine sat down to talk with him, she shared honestly about her own diagnosis and treatment experience. "The hardest part for me," Catherine told him, "has been accepting that I can't control everything about my health, and that some days will be better than others."
"How has that been for you?"
Marcus, who had followed Catherine's royal work for years, seemed amazed to be having such a personal conversation with someone he had only seen from a distance before.
"It's been really hard to accept that my life is different now from what I planned.
But seeing how you're handling it makes me think maybe I can find ways to make this experience meaningful instead of just something terrible that happened to me." Throughout the unit, Catherine had similar conversations with young patients and their families. She talked about the importance of asking for help when needed, about finding ways to maintain hope during difficult treatments, and about the value of support from family and friends. In the children's unit, Catherine met with younger patients and focused more on providing comfort and distraction than on discussing medical details. She read stories, played games, and listened to children talk about their dreams and interests beyond their illnesses. 8-year-old Lily, who was undergoing treatment for leukemia, showed Catherine a drawing she had made of a princess who was also sick but still brave and kind. "I made this for you," Lily said, presenting the carefully colored picture. "Because you're sick like me, but you're still helping people." Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes as she accepted the drawing. "Lily, this is one of the most beautiful gifts anyone has ever given me. Thank you for reminding me that being sick doesn't mean we can't still help others and be brave." The medical staff at Great Ormond Street was particularly grateful for Catherine's visit. Dr. Sarah Williams, who ran the hematology unit, explained how much it meant to families to see someone prominent dealing openly with a blood disorder. "When public figures hide their illnesses, it sends the message that these conditions are something to be ashamed of," Dr. Williams told Catherine during a private meeting. "Your openness is already changing conversations in our clinics. Families are more willing to discuss their fears and ask for support." During her visit, Catherine also met with researchers who were working on developing new treatments for myelodysplastic syndrome and related conditions. She learned about promising clinical trials and innovative therapies that might benefit patients in the coming years. Dr. James Mitchell, a leading researcher in hematology, shared his excitement about recent advances in precision medicine for blood disorders. "Your platform could help us raise awareness about the need for research funding and encourage more patients to participate in clinical trials," he told Catherine. The visit concluded with Catherine addressing a gathering of families, medical staff, and researchers in the hospital's main auditorium. This was her first major speech since her diagnosis was announced, and she had spent considerable time preparing remarks that would be both personal and meaningful. "3 months ago, I received a diagnosis that changed my life," Catherine began, her voice steady but emotional. "Since then, I've learned that serious illness doesn't discriminate based on age, status, or circumstances. But I've also learned that we don't have to face these challenges alone." She spoke about the importance of medical research, the value of patient advocacy, and the power of community support. Most importantly, she talked about finding meaning and purpose even in the midst of health challenges. "I've discovered that my illness doesn't define me, but it has taught me things about courage, gratitude, and the importance of human connection that I might never have learned otherwise," Catherine said. "I hope that by sharing my experience, I can help other families feel less alone and more hopeful as they navigate their own journeys." The audience's response was overwhelming. Many families were moved to tears, medical staff expressed their appreciation for her advocacy, and researchers shared their commitment to continuing their work to find better treatments. The media coverage of the hospital visit was extensive and positive, focusing on Catherine's authentic engagement with patients and families and her emerging role as an advocate for people with blood disorders. Public opinion polls showed that her approval ratings had actually increased since announcing her diagnosis, with many people expressing admiration for her courage and honesty. Over the following weeks, Catherine settled into a new rhythm that balanced her health needs with her royal duties and her growing advocacy work. She reduced her overall number of public engagements but increased her involvement with medical charities and patient support organizations. Working with the Palace Communications team, Catherine launched a new initiative focused on supporting research into blood disorders and improving resources for patients and families. The project, called the Blood Health Initiative, would coordinate funding for research, provide educational resources, and create support networks for patients. Dr. Chen reported that Catherine's health was stabilizing well under the new treatment regimen. The combination of effective medical care, reduced stress from hiding her condition, and the sense of purpose she found in advocacy work seemed to be contributing to her overall well-being. Having a sense of meaning and purpose is actually an important factor in recovery for many patients, Dr. Chin explained during one of their regular consultations. Your advocacy work isn't just helping others, it's likely helping your own healing process as well. The children adapted well to their mother's new public role as a patient advocate. They were proud to see her helping other families and impressed by the positive response from people around the world. George even expressed interest in learning more about medical research, inspired by his mother's work. As the year drew to a close, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with feeling unusually tired after morning runs and had led to becoming a global advocate for people facing serious illness. The diagnosis that had initially felt like a devastating disruption to her life had become a source of unexpected purpose and connection. During a quiet family evening at Kensington Palace, as snow fell gently outside their windows, Catherine sat with William and their children, reading through some of the thousands of letters that continued to arrive from around the world. "Mummy," Charlotte asked, curled up next to Catherine on the sofa, "are you glad that everyone knows you're sick now instead of it being a secret?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "I was very scared at first about people knowing," she said honestly. "But now I'm glad, because it means I can help other families who are going through similar things, and I don't have to pretend to feel better than I actually do. And, because now we don't have to whisper about your medicine," added Louis, who had never liked keeping secrets. As Catherine tucked her children into bed that night, she realized that the woman who had collapsed at the Royal Albert Hall had been transformed into someone stronger, more authentic, and more purposeful than she had ever imagined possible. Her illness had taken away some things: energy, predictability, the luxury of perfect health, but it had given her others, deeper empathy, a clearer sense of what truly mattered, and a platform to make a difference in ways she never could have anticipated. The princess who had once worried about disappointing people by canceling engagements had learned that the most powerful thing she could offer the world was not perfection, but truth. Her vulnerability had become a source of strength, not just for herself, but for millions of people around the world who were fighting their own battles with illness, fear, and uncertainty. Standing at her bedroom window that night, looking out at the lights of London, Catherine felt grateful for the journey that had brought her to this place. The diagnosis that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, the start of a new chapter in her life defined not by what she was losing to illness, but by what she was gaining through courage, authenticity, and the power of using her experience to help others. The alarming update from the palace doctors had indeed sent shockwaves across the UK and beyond. But those shockwaves had ultimately created something beautiful, a wave of compassion, support, and renewed commitment to fighting diseases that affected so many families. Catherine's courage in sharing her story had transformed a personal crisis into a force for positive change that would benefit countless others facing similar challenges. As she prepared for sleep, Catherine smiled thinking about the letter she planned to write to young Emma, the 8-year-old cancer patient who had taught her that being brave doesn't mean not being scared, it means doing what you need to do even when you are scared. Catherine was no longer scared of her diagnosis or of the public knowing about it. She had found her courage, and, in doing so, had helped others find theirs.